For 30 years. I slept on a moldy mattress in a basement that smelled like mildew and regret, listening to my siblings laugh upstairs in their heated bedrooms. Their laughter was my lullaby, their comfort my torment. Every giggle, every thump of footsteps above was a reminder that I didn't belong, that I was the ghost haunting someone else's perfect life. But last Tuesday morning, everything changed. A black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of the house. Polished chrome, deep black paint that reflected the rising sun like liquid obsidian. A car that didn't belong anywhere near the cracked driveway of the Cranes. The door opened, and a man in a flawless suit stepped out. Straight posture, calm eyes. And when he looked at me, really looked at me, through that tiny basement window, he said words that shattered 30 years of silence. Your Majesty, we've finally found you. Those 6 words flipped my entire world upside down, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is the Rowan Thorn. And if you told me a week ago that I was royalty, I would have laughed while scrubbing the warehouse floors at 3 a.m, sweat burning my eyes, hands cracked from chemicals, and my stomach twisting from hunger. For 3 decades, I believed I was nobody. Worse than nobody, a burden. A mistake that the world had forgotten to erase. The Cranes made sure I never forgot that. Judith Crane, the woman who told everyone she'd rescued me, loved to remind people of her charity. At every church function, every neighborhood barbecue, she'd smile that perfect porcelain smile and place a manicured hand on my shoulder like I was some exhibit. This one, she'd say, was abandoned. But we took him in. We gave him a home. She never mentioned that my home was the basement, 20 feet of damp concrete and shadows. She never said that every dollar meant for my care was spent on her designer handbags, her spa weekends, her son's private school tuition. She never said that her act of kindness was really just a twisted game of control. And Harold Crane, her husband, was no better. Where Judith was sharp and cruel, Harold was quietly venomous. He'd sit in his leather recliner, eyes glued to the TV, drink in hand, while his real sons, Blake and Dexter, played video games on their massive screen. And when I'd try to slip past, heading down to the basement after cleaning up their mess, he'd mutter things like, "Know your place," or "Don't get ideas above your station." To him, I wasn't family. I was furniture. A fixture that didn't belong but couldn't be thrown away. Blake and Dexter, the golden twins of the Crane Empire. They were 28, spoiled beyond saving, and proud of it. Blake fancied himself an athlete, though his training mostly consisted of posting selfies in gym clothes. Dexter called himself a musician, despite the fact that his guitar spent more time collecting dust than making music. Their bedrooms upstairs were mirror images of each other, massive, spotless, each one bigger than the entire basement I called home. They had walk-in closets, gaming systems, and beds that looked like they belonged in 5-star hotels. And me? I had a moldy mattress I'd pulled off someone's curb when I was 16 because it was still better than the floor. When I was 4, Judith taught me the rules. "This is the living room," she said, pointing with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't sit on the furniture. This is the dining room. You don't eat here. These are the stairs. You don't go up there unless you're cleaning." Then she opened the basement door. The smell of dust and mildew hit me like a wall. "This is yours," she said. Be grateful, and I was. At least I thought I was supposed to be. That basement became my world. Concrete walls that wept moisture in summer. Air so cold in winter I could see my breath. A single hanging bulb for light, a rusted metal bed frame, and a plastic dresser missing 2 drawers. That was my kingdom. Every night the Cranes would dine upstairs. Laughter echoing through the vents, the smell of pot roast or lasagna drifting down while I sat cross-legged on my mattress with a packet of ramen or a cold can of beans. Sometimes Judith would call down, her voice honey-sweet and venom-laced, "Rowan, dishes!" That was my invitation, not to eat, but to clean. Harold would bring his golf buddies over, men with expensive watches and louder laughs. They'd sip whiskey and joke about having help downstairs. And every time, the laughter would rise like smoke through the floorboards, filling my lungs until I couldn't breathe. None of them ever asked why a grown man lived in a basement. Why I looked half-starved. Why I always kept my eyes down. I worked hard, maybe harder than anyone I knew. The day after high school graduation, Harold ripped up my acceptance letter to Wayne State. He smiled while doing it. "College isn't for everyone," he said. "Especially not for people who should be grateful just to have a roof over their heads." So I got a warehouse job. Loading trucks, stacking boxes, managing inventory. 16-hour shifts that broke my body but not my will. My supervisor, Frank, an old guy with kind eyes, once asked me, "Why's a smart kid like you breaking his back for $15 an hour?" I told him it was temporary, that I was saving up. What I didn't tell him was that Judith took most of my paycheck, $800 for rent, $200 for utilities, and another $100 for household expenses. What she left me wasn't enough to live, just enough to survive. "You eat like you're in prison," Frank said once, watching me down a can of cold beans during lunch. "Just hungry," I said, but it wasn't hunger. It was survival. The Crane's house told two stories, one for the world and one for me. Upstairs was the American dream, family photos, football trophies, and guitars on the walls. A fridge plastered with Blake's report cards, Dexter's awards, and birthday cards from relatives who didn't even know I existed. And then there was the basement, the secret story. The one they hid behind smiles and Sunday prayers. Every morning I'd wake up at 5, shower in the utility sink because there was no bathroom downstairs, pull on my uniform, always clean even if nothing else was, and eat leftovers standing at the counter because sitting at the table was forbidden. "Family only," Judith would say, her voice dripping with contempt. I learned to move quietly. The stairs creaked and Judith hated the sound. So I learned where to step, only on the edges, only on the boards that didn't groan under my weight. I learned how to be invisible, how to exist without being seen. For 30 years, that was my life. 30 years of concrete walls and broken light bulbs, of whispered prayers and stolen moments of hope. 30 years of being told I was lucky to exist. And then came that Tuesday morning. It started like any other day. I was half asleep trying to find a clean pair of socks when the doorbell rang. 6 a.m. too early for visitors. Judith's voice followed, sharp, nervous. "There must be some mistake. We don't know anyone in England." I froze. England? Curiosity pulled me to the window well, that tiny square of glass that was my only connection to the outside world. And that's when I saw it, the black Rolls Royce polished like a mirror. A man stood beside it, tall and composed, holding a stack of documents. His presence was commanding, like he carried the weight of something ancient. Judith opened the door. I couldn't hear every word, but I saw her face drain of color. She tried to slam the door, but the man held it open, firm, calm, unmoved. Then he said something that made her step back like she'd seen a ghost. He looked past her, straight at the basement window, straight at me. And then came the words that would end my 30-year prison sentence. "Your Majesty, we've finally found you." I didn't know it yet, but my life in that basement was already over. The walls that had been my prison were about to become nothing more than a memory. The Cranes had spent 3 decades burying me, in concrete, in shame, in lies. But the truth was rising, and I was rising with it because sometimes your real story isn't the one you've been told. Sometimes it's the one that's been hidden from you, locked away in dusty archives, whispered in foreign tongues, and buried under 30 years of someone else's lies. And as the sunlight hit that Rolls Royce and the man in the perfect suit waited for me to step outside, I realized something I never thought I'd feel. Again, hope, raw, terrifying, beautiful. Hope, but what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the truth waiting beyond that door would change everything, because the Cranes hadn't just stolen my childhood, they'd stolen a throne, and the people who came to reclaim me weren't the only ones looking. Somewhere out there, in the gilded halls of power and secrets, someone else already knew my name. Rowan Thorne. And they were not happy I'd been found. I used to think pain had a sound, that low hum in your chest when you're trying not to cry, the quiet echo of footsteps when you're the only one awake, cleaning up someone else's mess. For 30 years, that was my life. Every night I climbed those basement stairs to scrub their plates clean, their laughter still ringing in my ears. Blake, the self-proclaimed golden boy, would deliberately spill food just to watch me bend down and wipe it up. Dexter would sit at the counter, smirking, filming me on his phone. "Check out our basement dweller," he'd say to his friends. And they'd laugh. All of them. They called me a charity project. Their pity was my prison. When extended family came by, a rare occurrence, I was introduced like a pet someone had rescued from the pound. "Oh, this is Rowan," Judith would say, her voice dripping with sweetness that never touched her eyes. "We took him in when no one else would." Poor thing had nowhere to go. Aunt Patricia once asked why I was so thin. Judith laughed, a delicate sound masking cruelty. "Oh, you know how teenage boys are. Probably spends his food money on video games. I was 25 years old, 25, and they still talked about me like I was a stray animal who should be grateful for scraps. But the cruelest part wasn't the basement. It wasn't the hunger. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was the way they made me believe I deserved it. Every day, in 1,000 little ways, they reminded me that I was lucky. Lucky to have a roof. Lucky they hadn't sent me to an orphanage. Lucky I wasn't rotting in a gutter somewhere. Judith loved that phrase. "You should be grateful we feed you." Feed me? I was feeding myself. By the time I was 30, I was paying them rent, $1,100 a month, to sleep on a moldy mattress in a basement that flooded every spring. I was working myself to death just to keep my spot in a home that wasn't mine. And still, I stayed quiet. I made myself small, invisible. I told myself, this is just how life is. This is normal. What I didn't know was that across an ocean in a country I'd never been to, a king was dying, whispering my name with his last breath. But that part of the story comes later. It started, really, the morning Harold Crane, the man I'd been forced to call father, fell off a ladder. I heard the crash before I saw it. A scream, then silence. I ran outside, heart pounding, and there he was, lying on the driveway, his leg twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn. Judith came running in her silk pajamas, her perfect composure cracking for the first time in my life. "Call 911, she shrieked. "Don't just stand there, you idiot!" And I did. I called. I waited with him until the ambulance came. Even after everything he'd done, my first instinct was to help. Because that's what 30 years of conditioning does to you. It wires obedience into your bones. That night, the hospital called. 3 fractures, 2 surgeries, months of recovery, and bills. So many bills. When Judith found out the cost, she nearly fainted. But then Blake, always the eavesdropper, heard something even worse. He came into the kitchen waving papers. "Dad's been gambling," he said. "He lost everything. The college funds, the retirement accounts." Judith's face went pale. She sat down, suddenly looking every bit her age. "He promised me he stopped," she whispered. Dexter started to panic. "What about my studio? You promised to help me build my music studio." Judith's eyes flicked toward me then, slow, calculating. That look still makes my stomach twist. "We have the house," she said softly. "And we have options." I knew what that meant before she even opened her mouth. "Rowan," she said, turning on that fake, honey-sweet tone she used for the church ladies. "We're going through a difficult time. Family helps family. We need you to step up." "I'm already giving you everything," I said. "I have $40 in my bank account." "Then you'll work more," Harold barked over the phone from his hospital bed.
"Sleep at work between shifts if you have to."
"You're young. You can handle it." And so I did. I worked 18-hour shifts, sometimes 20. I lived on coffee and vending machine sandwiches. Frank, my supervisor, started leaving food on my desk when he thought I wasn't eating enough. My body ached, my hands bled, and my soul felt like it was being crushed a little more every day. And still, it wasn't enough. 2 weeks into this nightmare, I overheard something that changed everything. Judith was in Harold's office talking to someone on the phone. I shouldn't have listened. But something in her voice and that fake sweetness again made me stop at the door. "Yes," she said. "We've housed him for 30 years. No official adoption, but surely that counts for something. There must be programs, compensation for families who take in abandoned children." My blood turned to ice. She was talking to social services. "He was left at our church," she lied smoothly. 6 months old, no note, nothing. "We took him in out of Christian duty. But he's 30 now, and frankly, he's become a burden. Barely contributes, eats our food, uses our utilities. If we could get some retroactive payment for our charity, it would help with my husband's medical bills. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands shaking so hard I thought the papers I was holding would fall. She wasn't just exploiting me anymore. She was trying to sell my story. Then came the final blow. The voice on the phone must have asked about my real parents, because Judith laughed, that same brittle laugh she used when gossiping after Sunday service. "Oh, who knows?" she said. "Probably drug addicts, teenagers, maybe prostitutes. You don't abandon a baby unless you're the lowest kind of trash. We saved him from that life. Gave him values, structure." My vision went white with rage. Saved me? She stole me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body ached, but it wasn't exhaustion keeping me awake. It was fury. The kind of deep, molten rage that only comes after decades of silence. The next day, I started digging. I spent my lunch breaks at the library poring over birth records, adoption registries, old newspaper archives from 1995. Every search hit a wall. There was no record of me, not as an adoption, not as a birth, nothing. It was like I'd been erased. And then, I found something. It wasn't about my birth, not yet, but it was the first crack in the lie. I was cleaning Harold's office one night when I found an old bank statement tucked in a filing cabinet. 1996. There was a deposit, $3,000, labeled with a reference number and 2 words that made my blood run cold. Monthly maintenance. I started searching through the other files. Page after page. Year after year, every single month, from 1996 to 2013, $3,000. Always from the same source, Thornfield Trust Management. The deposit stopped the month I turned 18, 17 years. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by 20 years of their paperwork, doing the math in my head. $648,000, over $500,000. That money was meant for me. And they kept every penny. All those nights I went to bed hungry. All those winters I froze under a threadbare blanket. All those times Judith told me I should be grateful. They were being paid to keep me in that basement. My hands shook as I took photos of every statement, every page. Each click of the camera felt like a heartbeat, steady, furious, alive. That night, during dinner, I snapped. They were eating pot roast, garlic, rosemary, red wine, the same smell that had tortured me through the floorboards for decades. I walked up the stairs, heart pounding, and slammed the stack of papers down on their table so hard the wine glasses jumped. "What is this?" I shouted. Judith froze. Harold's hand twitched on his fork. I held up the papers. "Someone was paying you $3,000 a month for 17 years. "Who?" Judith's face shifted from annoyance to panic. Harold tried to grab the papers, but I pulled them back. "You had no right to go through our private documents," Judith hissed, but her voice was trembling. "Who was paying you?" I demanded. Blake stood up, puffing out his chest. "Listen here, basement boy," he sneered. "You need to know your—" That was it. Something inside me snapped. 30 years of humiliation, pain, and silence exploding in a single heartbeat. I shoved him, hard. He crashed backward into Judith's china cabinet. Plates shattered. Glass rained down. The sound was thunder. Dexter jumped up but froze when he saw my face. "You tell me the truth," I said, my voice shaking. "Or I'm going to the police. This looks like human trafficking, fraud, kidnapping." Harold's face turned purple, but Judith grabbed his arm, whispering something. They looked at each other. That silent conversation of people who've shared too many lies. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was almost a whisper. "It was a lawyer from England. He contacted our church when you were a baby. Said your mother was someone important, that she'd died, and that you needed to be hidden. For your safety. The payments were for your care, your education." "My mother?" I asked. My throat was dry. "Who was she?" "We don't know," Harold snapped. "They never told us. Just said to keep you safe and quiet. Raise you normal. Never let you know," I laughed in a broken hollow sound. "And you thought locking me in a basement was keeping me safe?" "We kept you fed," Harold roared. "You kept the money that was meant for me." I shouted back. "You stole my childhood, my education, my life. That money built their futures," I pointed at Blake and Dexter. "Their cars, their schools, Their perfect lives, Judith started to cry. Not the tears of someone sorry, but the tears of someone caught. You can't prove anything, she whispered. We have no papers. It's your word against ours. I stared at her for a long time. Then I said quietly, then I have nothing left to lose. And I walked out. Everything I owned fit into a single backpack. 30 years of my life, reduced to one bag and a fury that burned hotter than fire. But as I stepped out into the cold night air, something strange stirred in me. A memory. A flash. The name Thornfield. The same name that appeared on those bank statements. And for the first time, I wondered if my last name, Thorn, wasn't an accident after all. Because somewhere out there, someone had paid nearly $700,000 to keep me hidden. And the reason for that? That was the one secret the Cranes never expected me to find. Imagine this. You've spent your entire life believing you were unwanted, abandoned, a burden that someone pitied enough to keep around. You've been told you were lucky just to have a roof over your head. You've been fed lies so deep they became the air you breathed. And then one day, a stranger shows up in a black Rolls Royce to tell you the truth, that you were never unwanted. You were stolen. You were a prince. I was sitting in my beat-up Honda parked behind a 24-hour McDonald's, using their Wi-Fi just to stay connected to the world. My life was a patchwork of survival, warehouse shifts, instant noodles, and exhaustion that wrapped around me like a second skin. I had exactly $300 hidden away in a crumpled envelope, money Judith never knew about. The woman who called herself my guardian, but treated me like a debt that would never be paid. That night, scrolling through my phone, I found him. James Garrett. Private investigator. His website said he'd worked with Scotland Yard and Interpol, and something about that made my pulse quicken. I didn't care what it cost. I didn't care that his consultation fee would drain everything I had. For the first time in my life, I needed to know who I really was. When I called him, it was 2 a.m.
Someone in England was paying for my care, I said, my voice trembling.
All I have is a trust company name and a stack of bank statements. He didn't hesitate. Send me everything. If someone wanted you hidden but safe, there's always a trail. There's always someone watching. I sent him the photos. Then I curled up in the back seat of my Honda, parked beneath the flickering glow of a streetlight, and tried to sleep. It wasn't comfortable, but for the first time in decades, I wasn't in that basement. Even the cracked vinyl seat of that old car felt like freedom. 5 days passed. 5 long days of sleeping in my car, showering at truck stops, dodging calls from Judith, her voice shifting from guilt to rage, from come home to you're stealing from us. I lived on gas station coffee and sheer willpower, and then, just as the sun began to rise on the 5th morning, my phone rang. Mr. Thorne, James said urgently, you need to be very careful. Are you somewhere safe? I frowned. I'm in my car outside the warehouse. Why? There's a black Rolls Royce about to arrive at your location. The man inside has diplomatic papers. His name is Lord Peaton, and he's been looking for you since 2013. Before I could even process the words, headlights swept across my windshield. A sleek black Rolls Royce glided into the parking lot, looking like it had taken a wrong turn out of another world. It parked directly behind my Honda, and out stepped a man who didn't belong in any part of my story. He looked like authority made flesh, silver hair, immaculate suit, posture straight as a blade. He stopped beside my window, waiting. I rolled it down, my hand trembling. Mr. Rowan Thorne? His British accent was sharp, deliberate, every syllable precise. Who's asking? I muttered. My name is Lord Peaton. I serve as chief advisor to the royal family of Almore. He paused, studying me with eyes that carried the weight of something ancient. I've been searching for you for 12 years. Your Majesty, I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from disbelief, not humor. My what? He opened a leather folder and pulled out a photograph. My breath caught. A woman, maybe 20, looked back at me. She had my exact bone structure, the same strange streak of premature silver in her dark hair, the same piercing green eyes I'd spent my life hating in the mirror. She was wearing a tiara. This, Lord Peaton said quietly, is my Princess Catherine of Aldor, your mother. I felt my stomach drop. He pulled out another photo, a tall man. regal, strong-jawed, with kind eyes that mirrored something familiar. And this is Prince Constantine, your father. They were returning from a humanitarian mission when their plane went down. You were 6 months old, safe in London with your grandmother, but in the chaos that followed, you vanished. I stared at him. You're saying the Cranes, they took me? No, his face darkened. Your grandmother's assistant, Margaret Crane, Judith's cousin, was supposed to bring you to the embassy for protection. Instead, she made a deal. The Cranes would hide you in America, receive payments for your care, and never reveal your identity. She told us you had died. We believed her, for 12 years. I sat frozen, every cell in my body screaming. Why would she do that? Money, he said flatly. In 1995, Margaret was paid £200,000 to make you disappear. She fled to South America and died in 2013. When her lawyer released her deathbed confession, we began searching for you again. So I'm really Prince Rowan Alexander Philip, heir to the throne of Almore, he finished for me. Your grandfather, King William, has never stopped searching for you. He handed me a tablet displaying DNA results. When the Cranes took you for vaccinations, your DNA was recorded in a global medical database. The match was undeniable. I own 7%. This can't be real, I whispered. Things like this don't happen. Your Majesty, he said softly, the kingdom of Aldor has been in mourning for 30 years. The king refused to name another heir, insisting his grandson was alive. And he was right. He handed me one final paper, my real birth certificate. Prince Rowan Alexander, Philip of Almore, born January 15th, 1995, Prince. Crown Prince Constantine and Princess Catherine. The embossed seal caught the light like something holy. My chest tightened. My entire life, rewritten in a single piece of paper. Lord Peaton's voice hardened. The Cranes knew who you were. They chose to steal what was meant for your care, your education, your dignity. They will answer for it. I could barely breathe. What happens now? He straightened. Now, Your Majesty, we take you home. Home. The word felt like a language I'd never learned. Within an hour, black SUVs surrounded the lot. Men in suits, the kind who move like shadows, gathered my few belongings. They drove me to the Cranes' house, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I sat in the Rolls-Royce while they entered the place that had been my prison. Judith came running out screaming, waving her arms. Harold yelled from his wheelchair. Blake and Dexter filmed the whole thing, probably imagining the clicks and comments their basement brother becomes king video would get. When the guards brought out my single box, my entire life condensed into cardboard, I told them to wait. I stepped out, the cold air biting my skin, and walked toward the porch. Judith's voice broke. Rowan, please, we're family! I stopped at the bottom step. No, you're thieves. Her mouth opened, but I didn't let her speak. You stole $648,000 meant for my care. You spent it on your children, your vacations, your comfort, while I slept in a basement. You told me my parents were drug addicts. You said I was lucky you didn't throw me out. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. They were royalty, humanitarians. They died saving others, and you made me believe I was trash. Judith's tears were crocodile slick. We raised you. You imprisoned me. I looked at her one last time, and the only thing I'm taking from this house is the truth. The flight to Almore took 9 hours. I stared out the window the entire way, watching the clouds drift by and trying to understand how a man who'd spent his life invisible could suddenly be heir to a throne. Lord Peaton filled the silence with stories about my parents, their kindness, their legacy. My mother, who'd built orphanages and fought for children no one else cared about. My father, who'd reformed the entire education system so no one would grow up feeling worthless. When the palace came into view, I couldn't breathe. It was like stepping into another world, towers, gardens, and golden light spilling over marble walls. But the moment that truly broke me was when I met him. King William. My grandfather. He was frail, in a wheelchair, but his eyes were sharp, filled with tears as he reached for me. You have your mother's eyes, he whispered, his hands trembling. And your father's stubborn chin. My boy, what have they done to you? I told him everything. Every night of hunger, every insult, every stolen dream. He cried openly, this monarch who'd ruled for 60 years, whispering apologies over and over. "I want them destroyed," he said to Lord Peaton. "Everything they own." But I stopped him. "No, let the law handle it. Let them live with what they've done. That's punishment enough." And it was. The Cranes were forced to repay every penny, with interest. They lost their home, their cars, their so-called prestige. Harold's gambling debts finished the rest. Last I heard, they were living in a cramped apartment, Blake and Dexter flipping burgers at a fast food joint. Judith sent letters, and dozens of them, begging for forgiveness, for money, for recognition. I never replied. 2 months later, my grandfather passed away, peacefully, content that the throne was finally safe. And so, at 30 years old, I stood before the world as King Rowan of Almore, a warehouse worker turned monarch. My coronation was broadcast to millions. Somewhere in that sea of faces and screens, the Cranes watched. Blake even posted, "My brother's a king." I blocked him before the post finished uploading. My first act as king wasn't about crowns or castles. It was about children, the ones like me who grew up thinking they were worthless. I created the Catherine Foundation, named after my mother, to help foster kids and survivors of abuse find safety, education, and hope. In 1 year, we've helped more than 3,000 children, and every single one reminds me of something I finally understand. Your worth isn't determined by where you sleep, or what others say about you. I still wake up sometimes at 5 a.m., ready for a shift that doesn't exist. I still eat too fast, afraid someone might take my plate away. I still flinch at sudden voices. Healing doesn't happen in a day, not even for a king. But when I look in the mirror now, I don't see the basement boy anymore. I see the survivor, the heir, the proof that even 30 years in the dark can't dim something meant to shine. The Cranes tried to bury me under concrete and shame, but they forgot one thing. Buried things grow. So if you're listening to this from your own basement, whether it's a real one or just the weight of a life that's tried to keep you small, remember, your crown is waiting. You just have to survive long enough to claim it, and when you do, the world will finally see who you were all along.